Okay, we're going to go ahead and start the Public Safety Committee. We're going to call that to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Boyd.
Present.
Alderwoman Howard.
Present.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
Present.
Alderman Muhammad. Alderwoman Boyd.
I saw her here.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
Here.
Chairman Vaccaro.
Present.
Alderman Muhammad. Alderwoman Boyd.
We have a quorum. We're going to start.
You have quorum.
And I know Alderwoman Boyd's here. Maybe she's, because she was on here earlier. So anyway, let's go with the approval of the minutes from the October 20th meeting.
I move for approval of the minutes dated October 20th.
And anybody want to second that, or?
Second.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderwoman Howard.
Aye.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
Aye.
Alderman Muhammad. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
Aye.
Chairman Vaccaro.
Aye.
5 aye votes.
Okay, so we've got that all done. So we got a few things on the agenda. I guess what we'll do, since we have guests for 152, so maybe we'll go ahead and start with 152. I'm sorry, I'm very distracted with stuff today. Okay, I'm sorry. So Alderwoman Ingrassia, if you want to go ahead and speak on Board Bill 152.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, members of the Public Safety Committee. I appreciate you setting aside time to discuss what I think is an emerging and very concerning issue here in the city of St. Louis. As most of you are probably familiar, our clerk, Alderman Terry Kennedy, introduced a bill that would make it illegal for self-help or illegal lockouts of tenants in the city of St. Louis. The Board of Aldermen passed it unanimously just about 2 years ago in October of 2017. And despite it not having an emergency clause, our mayor indicated her support of the importance of this issue by signing it into law a mere 4 days later. And subsequent to the moratoria that both the Centers for Disease Control have put in place into the end of the year, and our circuit court also having a similar restriction, there has been an uptick in landlords illegally locking out their residents. So they might come home, all of their belongings are on this curb or sidewalk, and the locks have been changed. And the police department has had difficulty enforcing this ordinance. Obviously, we all know there are some very serious issues with which they're dealing in the city right now in terms of violence, but also capacity issues. And so in working with housing advocates and the sheriff's office, we think that it would be smart for the city to authorize under a state statute the sheriff's office to be able to enforce this ordinance. So it's simply adding an additional section to the ordinance that's already in place. The sheriff's office is actually uniquely, I think, qualified to handle this issue because they are already issuing the summonses for any eviction notices that go forward. And so they have a much more intimate knowledge with the process than the police department does. And they, I've got Greg Christian, who's a deputy with the sheriff's office, here to speak if you have specific questions for him, but they feel like they have the capacity and personnel to take this on without any additional funding or hiring. I'm happy to take questions. And again, Greg Christian is here if there are questions of the sheriff's office.
You know, I'm going to just ask one or two quick questions, and then I'm going to have Jeffrey take over. But Greg, and I'd almost like to have the sheriff speak on this. I would ask actually that he would come over and speak on it, because isn't most of this covered under the state stuff now? I mean, are we just putting something together that's already in effect?
No, we would have to.
I was asking Greg.
So right now, one of the things that, the way this kind of came up is we get all the calls for illegal evictions. So if your landlord is trying to illegally evict you, a lot of folks call the police, then the police refer them to us. The police have the authority to enforce this ordinance that basically you can write a ticket to a landlord who's trying to conduct an illegal eviction, right? But most of the time, folks don't know how to tell the police that they're having an eviction that's illegal occur. And so they just refer that to us as a civil matter. Now, we've gotten plenty of illegal eviction calls during these moratorium during COVID here. And the thing that kind of came up in some of our discussions when it came to the moratorium is, yeah, we're getting a lot of these calls, but we can't enforce that ordinance because it's a municipal ordinance. We can only enforce state law at this time. But it is under state law, a sheriff's office can enforce local ordinances for municipalities if they come to an agreement with those local municipalities. And I think that's basically all this authorizes is to have the sheriff's office have the ability to write these tickets to anyone who's trying to illegally evict anyone, which evictions are pretty much our domain anyway. So it's something that we have the ability to do. We get the phone calls about it already. We just don't have the ability to, write a ticket or issue a citation to anyone who's violating the ordinance. So.
Okay. And I still believe I'd like to hear from the sheriff, only because he always says he doesn't have enough money to do what we ask him to do now. But anyway, Vice Chairman Boyd, and I'm going to have you take over. I'm going to have where I can hear the meeting, but I'm going to be over doing something else for a minute.
Okay. Let's see here. I got to get my roll call sheet up real quick. Excuse me, everybody. Okay. Alderwoman Howard, do you have any questions?
I guess what my question is do you have the capacity to respond, I guess, 24/7? Because people, could come home from their shift at 11 o'clock in the evening and be locked out. Greg, I just was wondering, does the sheriff's office have that capacity to respond, at any time when that happens?
So I would say that we do not. But again, this ordinance wouldn't prohibit the police from issuing the citation as well either. It would allow us to do this as well, in addition to the police. So we're not taking the responsibility away from the police department. It's just that we could be an additional help, as opposed to, when we get the calls, that we can issue the citation, as opposed to having to turn around and call the police.
Okay, so you would be
emergency call for an illegal eviction, right?
Okay, so you would be supplementing SLMPD. Okay. And then the landlord will receive the summons, correct?
I think that's how the statute, the ordinance is written. So.
Okay, that's my understanding. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Alderwoman Hubbard, is she here? Alderman Muhammad, I don't see him. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. I'm sorry, Alderwoman Pam Boyd.
I hear what they're saying. I guess my concern is about the communication. That's the only thing, because I do know the police contacts you guys when somebody is being evicted. But I guess, as Alderwoman Howard said, however, that if it's done late, how the communications be and how you get people back into their properties or keep them from being on the street?
I think that's a great question, Alderwoman Boyd. Thanks for bringing it up. Right now, there has been, with all the research I've done, 0 times that the police have issued a citation to a landlord for illegally evicting someone. And so they clearly lack the capacity to get there quickly because of everything else they're dealing with. And so while this is not going to be a perfect solution, it gives another layer of protection. I did reach out to Lieutenant Colonel O'Toole, who's over communications, and spoke with a lieutenant of his regarding dispatch. And so during the times when the sheriff's office is able to assist, they will just receive the radio calls similar to the police. So they will be in line with dispatch. So if someone calls the sheriff's office or 911, when the sheriff's office is available, they will be able to communicate that they are responding to that call instead of the police.
Okay, and so I guess that I'm listening to what you're saying, Alderwoman Ingrassia, and the challenge that I have, and probably a lot of my residents have, they can't get through 911. And so I think that's going to be a big issue, 1. And then 2, the people that are causing havoc or nuisance within the community, it's my understanding, they can be evicted if they are a nuisance on the nuisance list and have been to hearings, correct?
Yeah, I think you're referring to the restrictions on the moratorium and the the moratorium that's currently in place does allow exceptions for criminal behavior or nuisance activity.
Okay.
And this is similar, but not the same. I mean, illegal lockouts were already an issue in the city of St. Louis prior to COVID. The issue is just being exacerbated because of the pandemic. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I'm just concerned because, again, like I said, people can't get through 911. And so now I have somebody that's been illegally evicted, and then they're there and they have to get out because they can't get through. And so that's the after fact. Yeah.
No, I completely agree. I think that's the 911 on hold signal or message is of huge concern to many of us. And again, this is not a perfect solution, but it definitely affords another layer of protection. It helps support the police department with the responsibilities that they have to undertake, and allows for another department who has really much better knowledge of the eviction process to come on as support to the police department.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is that it, Alderwoman?
That's it. Thank you, sir.
Okay, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
No questions, thank you.
Okay, I have a few questions. First of all, thank you, Alderwoman from the 6th Ward. Illegal evictions are something that's definitely near and dear to me. I've been a landlord for almost 29 years, and I think I, understand the process, pretty well. Sometimes unfavorably toward landlords and sometimes favorably toward landlords, but right is right and we all have to follow the law. I'm kind of curious. So if a person feels like they're being illegally evicted, they're going to call 911 potentially, right?
Correct.
So if they call 911, they can't get through. The other option is to call the sheriff's office.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
The other option would be to call the sheriff's office.
They would still be able to call. I mean, right now they can call either, and the sheriff's office does get some of those calls now. But I think what the issue we're trying to resolve is that many times when residents call 911, because that's sort of the first thing they think about in terms of a solution, the police department can't get there quick enough to address the issue. Or when they do arrive, they indicate to the residents that it's a civil matter and maybe refer to the sheriff's office. And I think that writing citations to landlords who are undertaking this self-help illegal practice is one of the only ways to indicate to them it is not something the city supports. And so giving the sheriff's department this tool to actually write a citation citation for a municipal ordinance would allow for that, again, additional layer of protection for residents.
Sure. Let me ask you, your conversation with Lieutenant Colonel O'Toole, would they be willing to elevate the priority call if it's an illegal eviction occurring, so that they wouldn't have to wait 2 hours and maybe the police could respond, you know, within the same priority that they would do a priority 1 call? Because you're talking about somebody's livelihood. So even though someone wasn't shot or personally assaulted, is there a way that they could elevate it to a priority 1 call?
That's a good question. I also want to be clear, when I reached out to Lieutenant O'Toole, Lieutenant O'Toole, he put me in touch with Lieutenant Carnegie. So that's with whom I've had the most in-depth conversation. And also I did bring this to the attention of Chief Hayden. And it's my understanding based on those conversations that they just don't feel like they have the capacity with all of the other priorities they have to make this something that's of you know, such a critical nature, like a shooting or an assault or something else. And so since dispatch is able to communicate on the same radio system with the sheriff's office, dispatch would be able to just route those calls to the sheriff's office.
Mr. Christian, sorry, Deputy Christian.
Yes.
So when you guys get a call like this, how quickly can you respond?
I mean, it's something that we're going to have to put in a procedure for, but right now we aren't conducting evictions. So we do have a team that conducts evictions every day, right? They could respond to these as well. So, and right now, since they're not conducting evictions, it shouldn't be too difficult. I do want to add though, just so for your guys' informational purposes, is as soon as the is kind of COVID initially hit, and we had the initial moratorium on evictions, we got hundreds of phone calls from tenants who are being harassed by their landlords, landlords who are trying to figure out how they could kick out tenants. So this is kind of during this moratorium on evictions, it is an issue right now, probably more so than it ever has been. So
right now, do you guys issue summons or citations at all?
No, not local ordinance violations. You
do for state violations?
They're not allowed.
We have the authority to do that, yes.
Yeah, they're not allowed to enforce municipal ordinances unless there's an agreement. And so this board bill would authorize the city to enter into agreement with the sheriff's office for the limited purpose of enforcing this particular ordinance.
Sure, but I'm just kind of curious. I didn't know the sheriff issued summons at all, citations at all. So I'm just trying to be clear. What kind of citations do the sheriff office issue?
Right now, we don't really issue that many citations because we don't really police the streets. But you know, if the sheriff ordered me to, the state law is kind of gray territory and how we enforce the law. But you know, we have the powers of arrest and the authority to enforce all state laws.
Okay, didn't know that. Thank you. Yeah. So one more question, Sheriff. So will you guys have to order new citation books, or how would that financially impact you guys if you guys start engaging in this process?
Well, we will probably have to order some citation books that would meet the standard here for local ordinances, but that would be, I think, just a print shop issue at City Hall. So I don't think it would impact our budget too much.
Thank you. I'm curious as to what will you think about the landlord losing their right to occupy for 6 months to a year versus the $100 fine? I mean, that would be a big stick. And I think that would discourage landlords for wanting to illegally evict somebody, because if they do it and then they get a $100 fine, so what? I'm glad to get rid of that tenant, you know, so I'll gladly pay the $100 fine. But if they lost the right to occupy that property for 6 months to a year, that would probably hurt more than $100 fine. What do you think?
Are you asking
Are
me?
you asking me or?
I'm asking the sponsor, Alderwoman Ingrassia.
I think that's a good question. It's one of the things that we looked at the possibility of doing, but very gray and particularly concerning with respect to property rights and who has the ability to take those away and when. And so right now, literally nothing is happening. There's no negative repercussions for landlords who are undertaking this illegal practice. And so I think this is a step in the right direction to try and rectify that issue. I think what you're asking is much more complicated. I'd be happy to continue looking into it, but to address the immediacy of the issues that we're facing with the pandemic, I think it's smart to move this forward to see if we can protect our tenants in a more meaningful way than we are now.
Now, I'm not opposed to it. I don't want to slow it down per se. I'm just trying to be helpful, you know, to.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I think it's a smart question to ask and something I'd be willing to look into further.
Because if the city, when a property becomes a nuisance, certainly through court action, the city will shut it down, you know, based on it being a nuisance. I don't know if we've ever really explored or, you know, deny somebody occupancy rights. I know we can pull their occupancy zoning when they violate their zoning, the zoning laws. We can pull their occupancy. So anyway, maybe it's.
Yeah, to your point, you can do that under the nuisance law, which has a much more specific and spelled out process by which the building division is able to condemn a building by, you know, for occupancy. And so I think there's likely a discussion to be had in that regard.
Okay, I'm trying to count for 1, 2, 3, 4. Do we have a quorum? Oh, I see. Chairman Vaccaro. Madam Clerk.
I'm back for a second. I'm sorry.
Okay, good. I think it's 5 for a quorum, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
What do we have?
Okay.
7 on the committee, 5 for quorum.
All right. Well, I'll entertain a motion on board bill. What are we on? 152.
Yeah, the only thing I would ask Jeff is if this Greg guy could confirm that he speaks for the sheriff and there's no additional money that the sheriff's department's asking for. Because initially I would like to have heard from the sheriff, but if he's speaking for the sheriff and keeping in mind that this is taped and he's saying that the sheriff says he won't need any additional money, that would be my question.
Chairman, I can say that I speak for the sheriff and we will not require any additional money to issue any of these citations.
Oh, but you're saying that as far as the sheriff's department goes, you've talked to the sheriff.
Yes, I'm a spokesperson for the department.
And that the sheriff told you that they would not need any additional money. He won't be coming back over saying that we're throwing more stuff at them and that they need more money.
Not for these purposes, no.
Okay.
Well, I think Chairman Vaccaro, you bring up a good point. Let me ask the Alderman from the 6th Ward. Is there a fiscal note attached to the board bill?
I did not attach a fiscal note because I was told that the sheriff's office did not need additional staff or budget to make this happen. And I think that's been testified to today, that for these purposes, the sheriff's office feels because one, during the pandemic, traditional evictions are not happening currently, but also that even outside of the pandemic, there's always a team that is delivering eviction notices on a regular basis. And so there's staff already able to help with this issue.
I'm not as savvy with board bills requiring fiscal notes, but I think if we're requiring staff to do additional duties, then we may need a fiscal note, even if it comes back that it doesn't cost any additional money. I just hate to get this out and then it becomes an issue on the floor.
I'd be happy to explore that, but I don't believe we need a fiscal note to just say that it's not going to cost anything. I would be happy if it, I would really like to move this out of committee today. It's got introduced a few weeks ago. Time is of the essence here. These things are happening on a daily basis in our city. And if we determine that it's required to have a fiscal note for some reason, I'd be happy to have that amended on the floor.
Well, Terry's here, and I see Terry Kennedy. Do I see Lou Golly on here? Yes. Jeffrey, I got to step out again for a second, but I would think that I'd at least like to hear from Lou Golly or Terry, somebody to answer that question. And I'll be able to hear. I'm just going to.
Okay. All right. Mr. Kennedy, are you on the call? I see your name, but that, it could be a staff person using your name. Are you available? Okay.
Would you like me to message Mr. Golly to see if he's available?
I see it. You're on the call, Mr. Golly. Can you respond, please?
Yeah, I'm here. How are you doing, all the people? Yeah, so the ordinance that governs here is, hold on, I have it up. Let me give you the number, but it's 704-404. There's many different reasons why a fiscal note might be required. Glancing through this really quickly while you guys were discussing that, I don't see one that directly applies, but I am taking a very, just quick look at it right now as well, so.
Okay, it looked like Mr. Kennedy might want to chime. I saw something come up blue. Mr. Kennedy, are you available? Okay, who's using Mr. Kennedy's?
I think Sharita's talking to him.
Right,
okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of confusing if we see people, but then we don't hear.
Right, right.
Alderman, would you like me to email you and the other members of committee a copy of the ordinance?
That's fine, but what I heard you say, Mr. Golly, was that you weren't sure and you needed to kind of look through it some more to give it a definitive answer. I'm paraphrasing. Is that kind of what I heard you say?
No, that's what I said. I just wanted to know if you guys would like to go through it as well, because I could easily, have sent it to you. So
sure, yeah, that's fine if you send it to the committee.
Chairman, Vice Chair Boyd, I'm talking to Clerk Kennedy now. He said a fiscal note is not needed for that, and it wasn't one needed for the one he introduced as well a couple years ago.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Now we're back to Chairman. Do you want to handle this, or do you?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm more or less just hanging out here, running bang for us. So.
I have maybe I'm looking in the Google Drive at the board bill and I'm kind of confused. It looks like there's some misnumbering. I'm on page, wait a minute, what am I on? Oh no, that's the ordinance, I'm sorry. It's the ordinance. So the board bill is 2 pages, is that right, Alderwoman Ingrassia?
Let me open it up again, sorry.
It's 2, I have it.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I started scrolling down and I saw board bill at 87, so I realized that that's part of the ordinance.
Correct.
Okay, all right. So I'll entertain a motion on board bill 152.
So moved.
Second.
How is it moved? Let's be clear. What kind of motion do we have?
Move to move to put board bill 152 submitted to the Board of Aldermen.
With any recommendation? No.
With a do pass recommendation, I'm sorry.
Okay, so we have a motion to pass board bill 152 out of committee to the Board of Aldermen with a do pass recommendation. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and second. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Boyd,
Aye.
Alderwoman Howard.
Aye.
Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderman Muhammad. Alderwoman Boyd.
Aye.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
Aye.
Chairman Vaccaro.
Aye.
5 aye votes.
Okay, Board Bill 152 comes out of committee with a due pass recommendation. Next board bill before us is Board Bill 97, sponsored by Alderwoman Ingrassia.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. Board Bill 97. I want to make sure I introduced a committee substitute. It seemed like maybe some folks were having difficulty opening it. And so I don't want to ask to have it put before us if you don't think it was introduced timely.
I would say it was in some format that we couldn't do. And I would say it would be better to wait. And plus, I think there's going to be 600 tons of questions on this one. 600
tons is a lot. And I'm happy to entertain those. It was definitely not a bill that I expected to come out of committee today. So one of the things that we have been recognizing nationally is that the number of documented homeless encampments continues to increase. For example, in Missouri in 2007, there were 0 documented encampments. In 2017, there were 9. So we are still dealing with some of the issues from the Great Recession. Plus, we continue to have issues with rising rents and a lack of resources for mental health and substance abuse issues. And while encampments are not an end solution, they do provide temporary stability for people and their belongings. When we are punitive with respect to the way that we break down encampments, it just sort of creates a cycle of people being kicked out of where they're staying, their belongings are taken, and everything's broken down. And then a week later, there's another encampment at another area, and the cycle continues. So we're not really addressing the actual problem in a way that makes sense. And a number of cities, including Indianapolis, Seattle, Charleston, Las Cruces, New Mexico, have put ordinances into place to kind of create regulations around what the process should be so that residents of these encampments understand when they're allowed to be somewhere legally or illegally, and so that the city is required to provide a level of just honestly human dignity and thoughtful notification and a process to address these issues. And so this board bill would create that process. And again, I'm sorry, I'm having internet connection issues. I'm pulling up the board bill here in just a second. Mr. Chair, I can walk through specifically what it does. I'm also happy to just start taking questions.
It's really up to the vice chairman. You had said you weren't really wanting to do anything today with it. It's up to the vice chairman. I shouldn't have chimed in, and I apologize.
I mean, if there are a lot of questions, which you indicated there might be, I'm happy to answer those today. And then if I need to bring back some homework to answer those, if I'm not able to, I'm happy to hold it. If people are supportive, I'm happy to ask for a vote moving it forward.
Okay, and I'm happy to hear you walk through the bill.
Okay. I'm going to try and pull it up. I can't pull up my drive for some reason. Just give me 1 second. I apologize.
And then I would ask you if I could ask questions. I'm going to run across the room, but not, you can put me at the end, but if I could ask questions, I'd appreciate that.
Joe, please walk, don't run.
No, I can't run. I'm too old.
You're not supposed to run in the house.
Spoken like a true mom. So the first thing, I think if you go to section 3 on page 5 of 15, it starts outlining what the requirements would be if an encampment is removed. And that would be that people are engaged sufficiently with outreach activities. It also codifies the fact that the continuum of care, which is a group of stakeholders who provide services to our unhoused neighbors, are required to be worked with. So the COC is not just some nice volunteer organization of like-minded people. We are required to have a continuum of care because we receive HUD funding. And so I think the way that we rely on their expertise and knowledge and their relationships with our unhoused neighbors, it needs to be codified to make sure that they are at the table. I appreciate everything that the administration has tried to undertake, especially during the pandemic, but I can't imagine if I were living in a tent that the chief of staff and the director of operations would be the people that I would want to trust and take advice from in terms of how best to move forward with an outreach plan. So this would require the COC to be at the table for those conversations. It would require the city to provide better notification and more notification about the anticipated removal or impound of personal belongings. And then continuing to scroll down, it would allow, require housing to actually be available. A lot of times I hear that, the city is saying that we have available shelter, but that's not really the case, and especially in terms of a lot of the shelter space that the city has contracted with folks to undertake has very restrictive rules that a lot of people are not able to make work. And so we need to be more thoughtful about who is at the table, requiring or explaining what actual adequate housing means. It also requires personal property that's confiscated to be set aside for 90 days, especially if the person is not at the encampment when the city moves in to break it up. And yeah, again, just a lot of notification requirements in terms of giving people time. There is an emergency section so that if it's found that something is a public safety issue or a health issue, you don't have to wait the 30 or 45 days. And then at the end, it creates an advisory committee that will help guide these types of issues moving forward. And that's the gist of it. I'm happy to take questions from the committee.
Okay, so Alderwoman Howard.
I think this bill takes in, it's huge. It's a lot to digest. I guess one of my, questions, what's the difference between unsafe and hazardous? It seems to me if it's unsafe, it's hazardous. And you seem to divide this and parse these two words out and treat them differently. The other issue is who's going to pay to provide the porta potties and the facilities and the storage space for these things? And what's the difference between unhousedness and homelessness?
Okay, that was a lot. So
okay, well, I mean, I probably have more.
Yeah. Unhoused and homeless are the same, the same issues. There are definitions in the very beginning of the bill that explain what we consider hazardous versus unsafe. And then the payment or the budget, I think that's a good question. The city has been able at its discretion during the pandemic to provide water services and a number of other types of services and hasn't seemed to have a problem undertaking that. I think that I'm willing to entertain the idea that there might need to be a fiscal note attached to this, but I've been trying to the best of my ability, and I think members who are taking care of the unhoused community have been trying to the best of their ability to get the administration and the Health and Human Services Department to engage in a more meaningful discussion on how we might be undertaking best practices to address these issues. And we haven't really been able to get anywhere at all. And so I'm hoping a conversation on the record moves us further. And I think codifying this is critically important to make sure that we are addressing our unhoused neighbors in a way that makes sense to the Board of Aldermen, to our residents.
And I guess my other question is, you say there isn't adequate services available or adequate housing available. And then I hear there is, but my dilemma is I have encampments, and, I'm torn between the people that are, legitimately living in their homes nearby and having to deal with the encampments, outside their front doors, that house people that have, mental health issues, drug issues, they get in fights and what have you. And we're going to give them notice and give them 45 days. My fear is, you've got an unsanitary conditions that are going on, unsafe conditions, and I get notice has to be given, but I mean, the people that are living there are dealing, they have children, they have families, they can't live comfortably, in their homes with this going on outside. Their children, they're fearful of having their children go out to play. And then, we're giving them 45 days. It just seems, a little, there's a fine line of walking between these people's rights and then your constituency's rights. And I just wonder, when you say there isn't, is it because, and my estimation is we have services, but the people have to avail themselves to those services. And I understand there's a variety of reasons why they may not. They might have mental health issues. They might not want to give up the addiction, and those are all conditions of them taking advantage of services. They have to commit to certain parameters. And I get that maybe they don't choose to do that for whatever reason, that's a whole spectrum. So I hesitate, because if we have nothing to motivate these people to get off the street, and we're making it, the time, and then, the weather, you got 45 days of winter possibly, and they're going to be out there on the street. Don't we worry that they might suffer frostbite or some other health issues? So I guess there's just a whole lot wrapped in this of how we're meeting their needs, but then what about the needs of our constituents?
Sure. And I think everything you brought up are things that we all need to be thinking about. Balancing the needs of everyone in our community is a delicate tightrope that we all walk each day. I will say that a lot of times when, well, first let me say that this doesn't allow an encampment to just occur anywhere. Just because me and 10 of my friends decide that we're gonna take up residence across the street from your house doesn't mean that that's an appropriate place for an encampment to be. The other thing I will say is that in some of the areas where there are encampments where especially there's no disruption of any sort of residential activity at all, cities and other places are providing things like a porta potty, like running water, things that allow for the residents to be able to take care of themselves in a more meaningful way. This again is not an end goal. This is a temporary solution so that the COC and the city can work more meaningfully together to provide housing. Because to your point, Alderwoman Howard, I agree, people have to be willing to undertake the services that are offered to them, but sometimes it's the way that the services are offered. It's a matter of building up trust with people, and the people who are on the ground every day working with these individuals know how to interact. And sometimes the city officials who are coming down there, even though they are probably very well-intentioned, don't understand how to work with this community the right way. And there's always going to be a contingent of folks who do have mental health issues that they struggle with, do have drug addiction issues. And so we have to be able to find them permanent housing as well. Just because you don't want to follow the rules that we think you should, doesn't mean that you don't deserve a place to stay that's safe. And there's a way to handle situations like that, that respects the rights of the unhoused individual and still respects other members of the community. And some of the cities that I mentioned before are doing this well every day. I've been in close contact with Tacoma, Washington and Seattle about their programs. And I also spoke to someone in Indianapolis. So again, I appreciate your concerns. I think they're valid, but I think there's a way to do it well. And we have case studies in other places that exemplify that it can.
Question, have you been in contact with our social services department? Have they helped you craft this?
As I mentioned, I have tried to work, especially since March with the pandemic, directly with the administration, also members of Health and Human Services, along with stakeholders who provide services that the city sometimes contracts with. And I just don't think we're getting anywhere. And sometimes it makes a lot more sense to have a public discussion that's on the record in order to move some of these things forward.
And just for clarity, you said you had not hoped to get this out of committee today?
Not necessarily, no. I figured that there would be, I mean, it's a complicated new solution that we're discussing. And so I'm taking notes on the questions that you're asking, and we'll do the same for the other committee members. And then I would be happy to get that information back to you.
I would like to see our social services and possibly the health department in on this discussion as we come back, so that we don't make missteps, and also, you know, maybe a bit of information about the cost of such a program.
Okay, I've got all that down. Thank you so much for your question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is Alderwoman Hubbard with us? Okay, Alderman John Collins Muhammad. Alderwoman Pam Boyd, any questions?
No questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm listening.
Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
I didn't have any additional questions either.
Okay, I had a few questions. Alderwoman, how do we deal with people who intentionally place people in our city and create a new encampment? How do we deal with that? Because I'm told that that happens from time to time.
In terms of people coming from other areas?
Of people, whether it's a van of people, you drop off 8 or 10 people right across from City Hall.
Yeah, I think that in my experience is not something that happens often. I think we definitely know that there are issues in terms of trying to regionally address some of our adjacent counties feeling like they should bear some of the responsibility of caring for our unhoused neighbors. If there's a situation where anybody feels like somebody has intentionally literally dropped off a bus of people with tents, I think that's likely a law enforcement issue. That's never been something that's brought to my attention outside maybe a one-off situation of like an individual who gets released from like a local municipality's jail or something like that.
Sure. So how do these encampments grow? I mean, I'm reminded of the situation that we had during the pandemic early, where they were across the street on Market Street, and they just came from out of nowhere. I mean, just you wake up one day and here they are. How did that happen? Any idea?
Well, I think part of the issue is that they get moved around from place to place. So encampments were already a thing before the pandemic. I think the conversations weren't as elevated and people weren't talking about it as much. And obviously the encampment that ended up across from City Hall created quite the controversy within the St. Louis community, especially downtown residents and businesses. And again, I understand their concern, but most of the time, these encampments are in places where they're not coming into close contact with the regular commerce and residential uses in the city itself. And those are things that can be addressed. Encampments don't belong everywhere or anywhere.
Yeah, my first experience with an encampment was pretty much down near the river, and it was kind of like out of sight, out of mind. I had no idea that it existed until I had a tour, and I wasn't sure if it was through St. Patrick's Center or what agency that I did a tour with, but it was quite the sight. But let me ask you this. Do you think that the encampment site that was across from City Hall was put there intentionally so that it could create the opportunity to have more dialogue and shed a negative light on the city?
I would be really surprised if that were the case, but I have no like on the ground knowledge of how it arrived there. I know that I was one of the people that was alleged to set it up. Someone said that I and some other aldermen bought tents for people and put them down there, which is absolutely not the case at all. In fact, I had not really been very involved in issues surrounding advocacy for homeless residents until after that encampment was already established. So I apologize if that was the case. I don't have any information on that. And again, I would be surprised if that were the case.
Okay, let me ask you this, because as you said that they certainly don't belong everywhere. I remember several months ago, I was driving, I think, through Alderwoman Howard's ward, and I saw a homeless person set up in a tent out in front of somebody's house in the tree lawn area. And I just thought, wow. I mean, I had never seen that before. And I just couldn't imagine what the families on that block, or the family who, you know, it was right in front of that person's house, you know, had to deal with. That certainly, well, it was a sight to see, and certainly we need to get help for people in those instances. But I mean, that was probably the most bizarre stage that I've ever seen. And we certainly need to be sensitive and mindful of helping people who are homeless. I am definitely down for helping those who are unhoused. I think we definitely need a good strategic way of handling it without always blaming the city. I think what frustrates me is it seems like the city of St. Louis gets blamed for all the unhoused population in the whole region. And we literally get dumped with unhoused people. And we don't have unlimited resources to deal with this at the end of the day. So if we posted signs in certain places that make sense, like across the street from City Hall, or, you know, wherever, you know, and said, hey, you know, no camping, would that be enough to discourage people, you think, so that we don't have to deal with that issue?
I don't know if I know how to answer that question. I don't know that we need to put up signs indicating that camps can or can't be established in certain places. I think if we start to see an area that people are attempting to utilize as a semi-permanent location for an encampment, that again, meaningful interaction with those residents, and not just sometimes city officials who are well-intended but don't have the expertise to handle that situation. There's the possibility of moving those to a more appropriate place. But yeah, I mean, I don't think a sign is going to, I don't think signs really work for most ordinance issues we have.
Okay. Do you think that the city has the expertise to deal with the homeless issue, the unhoused issue? And what's the difference between homeless and unhoused?
It's the same. I think unhoused is just as nomenclature evolves with respect to a lot of terminology we used, unhoused seems to be a kinder way to talk about our neighbors who don't currently have permanent homes. Did you have two parts?
The expertise of the city. Do you think the city has the expertise to deal with this?
I think that they are part of the solution. I think the reason that HUD requires the continuum of care to exist if we receive funding to address homelessness in our city, that the federal government realizes that the city alone cannot take that on. I think we are woefully underfunding our health and human services departments, which also creates problems. But the city has a lot of competing interests that it's dealing with. And so it's very difficult sometimes, I think, I apologize, it's sometimes very easy to push aside how to meaningfully, with best practices, engage our unhoused neighbors in a way that helps them find success because of the pressures to just get them out of everyone's face and out of everyone's neighborhood. It's just, they are the problem. And so I think we can be doing much better. along with the continuum of care.
Right, so your bill suggests that, you know, after trying to work with them for 30 days, I guess after the expiration of 30 days, then the city can go in and take their possessions and kind of move them out. Is that right?
Generally speaking, yes.
Okay. And how do you think that will fix the situation?
I think it gives
inevitable in my, I'm sorry, the inevitable in my mind is going to happen, whether it's 7 days, 14 days, 21 days, 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
If a person doesn't want to move, they're just not going to move.
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be situations where a handful of individuals prefer to stay in an encampment situation, but I think that's the exception rather than the rule. And I think the problem that I keep hearing about and that I've seen happen over and over again, even as a witness to these breakup of encampments, is that it's a lot of misinformation. There's not a lot of notification, and the people who are living there are not dealt with in a way that's dignified or in align with best practices that we know are working in other places. And so I don't think it's inevitable, whether it's a day or 5 days or 6 months. I think it's the manner and the mechanisms by which we're undertaking this work. And I think that there are at least 10 case studies across the country of places that have undertaken this work well or headed in the right direction that we can learn from their challenges and what has worked well and learn from their mistakes.
Give me an example of one that's worked well.
Seattle, Washington, San Diego, California.
What are they doing that makes it work well?
There's a scorecard that gets utilized. Let me pull it up really quick. Thanks for asking about this. Sorry, I'm not used to having I used to have paper in front of me all the time. And now everything's on the computer.
And it's easy if you have two going at one time, right? You can do Zoom, and then you have the other one where you can look up stuff.
I have one tiny one. All right, I found it. So principle 1 is all people need safe, accessible, legal place to be, both during at night and during the day, and a place to securely store belongings until permanent housing is found. Principle 2 is delivery of services that respect the experience, human dignity, and human rights of those receiving them. Principle 3, any move or removal of an encampment must follow clear procedures that protect residents. Principle 4, where new temporary legalized encampments are used as a part of a continuum of shelter housing, ensure it is as close to possible fully adequate housing. Principle 5, adequate alternative housing must be a decent alternative. And principle 6, law enforcement should serve and protect all members of the community. And so this was, there's a lot of research. I think probably the most helpful one I found was a pretty comprehensive study by the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty from 2017.
Okay, would you mind emailing that report to the committee?
I'm happy to do that.
I'm really interested in knowing how it was executed. I mean, I always hear about all these nice, the research papers that are done by different universities and all sounds good. And it's kind of like taking a class. Everything sounds good when you read the book and you deal with the book, but when you go out there to do the practical stuff, it didn't work that way. And it's like, what's wrong? So I'm curious to know a little bit more about that.
Would you like me to get statements from the cities that I've spoken with about this?
Sure, that'd be helpful.
Okay.
So in your bill, you talk about we would have to basically store the property that's picked up. How long do you anticipate that we would have to store the property?
It's 90 days in the bill. That's the maximum.
Okay, then we could just discard it. Okay.
Yes.
Let's go to section 5 in your bill. I wasn't sure how to interpret it. Section 5 talks about collaboration with other entities. The city will only direct, engage, cooperate, or contract with any other entity to engage in any removal or impoundment action in accordance with this ordinance.
I know the committee substitute is not before us, but I removed that in the committee substitute.
Oh, okay. I just thought I wasn't interpreting it right. Okay, let's go to section 7. Section 7 is at the bottom of page 14. I'm a little concerned about assessing penalties to the city, where we automatically, without a judicial process, award, people money based on a violation that we created. Is that even legal?
It is, and we, as a city, do that to folks every day. People can be cited with immediacy, and they can be imprisoned or incur a fine. And I understand your concern, I suppose, but I don't really know how else to make sure that we follow the letter of the law unless there is a consequence.
Well, I understand certainly the city, having some kind of sovereignty, can assess penalties against citizens. I get that. But why would we assess penalties against ourselves? I mean, that just doesn't sound right, because that's what the judicial process is all about. So we would be setting up a situation where we would tax ourselves for trying to do the right thing.
It's not a tax, it's a penalty if we don't follow our own ordinance.
Yeah. Where else do they do that?
There's a few places. I'll look up with specificity. I know Seattle is one, and I'll have to look up the others.
That's quite interesting. I'd like to know if within our charter that if that's something that we can actually do.
Okay, I'd be happy to get a legal opinion on that.
And I'll just be honest with you up front, that's not something I would be interested in supporting. I mean, I think that the city should do right, but I don't, that doesn't sit well with me. Maybe it just need to sit a little while longer, but as of today, that's not working for me.
Okay, if you happen to, I mean, obviously it's not your bill, but if you wake up in the middle of the night and you have a light bulb moment, please feel free to share.
I'm old to have those moments, I think. That's how people treat me anyway. I don't know if my light bulb shines bright anymore. I need a recharge. There was one other thing, and I can't put my finger on it, but I didn't write it down, so that's on me. Oh, the last thing. So I do think it would be helpful to have meaningful discussion with the Health and Human Services, and I heard you say that you've been struggling to try to, get the conversation and work together. I think they do good work. I would be interested to know their perspective, and we should probably have another hearing on your bill, which is more than likely, and they should be invited and they should attend. So I think it's important.
I will reach out, I agree.
We hear from that agency, because I don't want people to think that the city is just failing and not doing what it can do, because I really think that the city does a good job. That doesn't mean they can't do a better job at dealing with the unhoused population. So
I appreciate you saying that. This board bill is in no means an accusation that the city is not doing good. Just to your point that we could be doing better.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have, and I will go to the chairman.
First off, I'm glad. No, I won't say it would be.
I have one more question, and whenever. Okay.
Okay. Chairman.
I'm not going to say what I was going to say because it would probably be considered mean-spirited, so I won't. But what I will say, I remember when I suggested that we put basketball in Forest Park, and then you actually wrote a bill saying, no, you should do that in your park, which I already did before you wrote that bill. Why don't you amend this bill to make it in your ward at Buda Park? And that would be a great place. You can do encampments there, we can make sure people go there. Just amend the bill. Because I think when you leave it open to all the parks.
It has nothing to do with parks, Mr. Chairman. There's nothing in here about parks.
So where are these things going to be set up if it's not a park?
It depends on the encampment. Sometimes encampments have been on private property and we still disband them.
Well, I would suggest, I think I'm going to have to break that door. That's the hospice people. So I really don't have any questions. I'll save everything for later.
Okay, and also to your point, I've been working closely with a group of stakeholders to about the possibility of putting in a tiny house project in the 6th Ward. And I could not agree more that the North Side shares an unfair burden on trying to resolve these issues, and these issues should be resolved citywide. We do have a homeless shelter for men in Burr Grove East, and I was very proud of our community and the service providers who worked very well together to come up with a smart solution to provide housing for our neighbors who needed it.
Okay, and then, well, anyway, I'm going to save it for the next go around. Mr. Vice Chair, unless you have, Carol had, I'm sorry, Alderwoman Howard had other questions, and then Alderwoman Grass asked if I could handle her bill because she couldn't make it. When you get to that. Okay.
Alderwoman Howard.
Yes, I have 2 more questions. Do you know the current homeless count, Alderwoman Ingrassia?
I do not today, no. I do know that especially winter shelter is always a problem. It has been since at least I took office 7 years ago. It is expected to be even more significant problem over this winter because there is an increase in our population of homeless people. I'd be happy.
So you don't know what the last homeless count was when the last count was taken?
The point in time count?
Yeah, the point in time count.
I don't. I'd be happy to look that up and send it to you.
Okay. And then the other question I have, you're talking about the continuum of care. These are agencies that provide shelter for people, is my understanding. Is that correct?
Not exclusively, but there are many, yes.
Okay. Do you know the agencies that coordinate with City Health and Human Services or the social services to provide shelter for unhoused people in the area?
I know a number of them, but probably not all of them. I'd be happy to, I mean, I'm sure they get funding from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund right now because of the CARES Act funding. I think there are other departments who have, like the health department, for example, has contracted. St. Patrick's Center, Biddle Center.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there are.
I mean, I don't know all of them either. I'm just wondering. And then I understand that some of the family women and children shelters are located outside our metropolitan area. So
yeah, we have actually a really significant issue in terms of keeping families together. So yeah, it's always a problem, but exacerbated by the pandemic. Okay, if you could get the point in time count for the next meeting, I'd appreciate it. And then the number of providers we have, just the number. Yep. Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, so we're going to hold Board Bill 97 for another committee hearing. Thank you, Alderwoman Ingrassia. Yeah, thanks for all of your time and your thoughtful questions. I appreciate it. You're welcome. Okay, Mr. Chairman, you're up for Board Bill 150.
Yes, Alderwoman Ingrassia asked me, I'm sorry, Alderwoman Grass asked me, when I wrote the original ordinance, which basically banned, it really made it impossible for you to barbecue in your backyard. When I wrote it, we said that a fire, it describes what a fire pit is, all that stayed in there, but we put a 25-foot rule. And basically most people's yards are 25 feet. So all it is doing is amending the original bill that I wrote, going from 25 feet down to 12 feet. This way, if someone wants to barbecue or if they have one of those little fire things in their yard, you know, they can use it. That's all this bill, that's all the amendment changes. It's still, the bill still keeps what a fire pit is. In other words, you can't make your yard a fire pit. And, but in the original bill, Al from the firefighters called me and said that the bill actually basically bars people from even being able to barbecue in their backyard. So this just changes it from 25 down to 12 feet. So I'm open for questions. If I can, I'll try to answer.
Okay, well, let's go down the list. Alderwoman Howard. You're muted, Alderwoman Howard.
I have no questions.
Okay, thank you. Alderwoman Tamika Hubbard. Alderman Muhammad. Alderwoman Pam Boyd.
I have questions. You saying that this bill is prohibiting from people barbecuing in the back?
The original bill that I wrote, I put a 25-foot, well, actually, I was helped getting this, but I put a 25-foot for any fire structure. And so the bill needs to be fixed. And what Alderwoman Grass is doing is she's amending it down to 12 feet from any structure. At 25 feet, you basically couldn't get any, you know, if you couldn't even get away from your house at 25 foot on a lot of the lots. So this is just making it where it's easier to, you know, I don't know that they were even enforcing it, but the original bill said you couldn't make a fire within 25 feet of any structure. This amends it down to 12, which should be enough space, you know, for a city lot.
I guess I'm confused because are you referring to the front or the back of the property?
I'd have to look at the original bill, even though it was my bill. I would think either front or back, it doesn't matter. In my bill, it said you couldn't make a fire within 25 feet of any structure. Okay. That would have put you out in the middle of the street somewhere. And it certainly would have, you know, 25 feet was like, you figure most yards, you couldn't get 25 feet away from a structure. So this just amends it down to 12 feet, which makes it a lot more reasonable for somebody. It doesn't change the bill, just how many feet. The original bill described the fire pit being, you know, the 3 foot by 3 foot and all that. But where the problem in the original bill was, it said that you couldn't build a fire. And that, I mean, that seemed like a barbecue pit within 25 feet. And it was just wrong. And this is just a correction to the bill.
Okay. I was just confused because I thought it was for, you were saying for the back. And I was like, and I'm thinking barbecuing, and I was like, well, you don't want them to barbecue in the back. And so you saying front or back. Right. And so I'm total agreement for the front because that's the issue that we deal with. So that's why I was just trying to get clarity.
Well, in the original bill, you basically couldn't even barbecue in your backyard because you had to figure out how to get 25 feet away from a structure.
Okay.
I doubt anybody would enforce it, but at least this makes it it makes more sense.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Okay, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
No questions, thank you.
I want to piggyback on Alderwoman Pam Boyd. I'm looking through the ordinance and I know it talks about within, so we're changed to within 12 feet of a structure, but I don't see anything in here that prohibits somebody from barbecuing in their front, which drives me nuts as well.
Right, right.
And we can actually amend it to add that to this. The problem in the bill that the firefighters, the fire marshal, and then Al from the firefighters said, you know, Joe, 25 feet from a structure, if you think about most people's house, to try to even the barbecue or start any fire, you know, and how people sit out with those little pit fire things, it would be hard in most yards to get 25 feet from a structure. We can amend, you know, we can amend this. All she was doing was going from 25 down to 12 feet, which made more sense. We can.
Well, can I interject something here, please? May I interrupt?
Well, can you let them finish and then I'll come to you?
Okay. All right.
No, I was pretty much finished. I mean, all this is doing is amending it from 25 to 12 feet.
Right. Okay, Alderwoman Howard, go ahead.
I guess what I want to say is you'd have to have a heck of a front porch to get 12 feet away from your house.
I have to be answering the front. I'll be back in 1 minute at the most. Okay, I apologize.
It's not me barking.
So yeah, Alderwoman.
And so I guess we should add that, you know, it's 12 feet, but it should be, you know, exclude, you know, having a fire on your front porch. I agree with you with that, you know, the barbecue pit on the front porch. It's kind of like, why?
Not just that, but even in the front yard, it just,
we
have some yards that don't have hills, and you may have, you know,
a flat yard. Yeah. So,
but we can always come back and amend it. We got to do another presentation. I'm fine with just voting this out and coming back at a later date.
And if Alderman Grass wants to amend it on the floor, I guess she could. So.
Okay. So.
I'm good.
1, 2, 3, 4. So we have to wait until the chairman comes back.
So what I'm hearing, we don't have a bill that prohibits you from barbecuing on the front.
Actually, I'm not sure. And I'm hesitant to want to amend this because I want to go check the code and see. We may already have it in a different section.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I'm like you, just pass this out, but we probably need to research that part. Yeah.
So I'll entertain a motion to pass Board Bill 150 out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and second. Any objection to previous roll?
No.
Okay, hearing no objection, Board Bill 150 comes out of committee with a due pass recommendation. Now we're done with board bills for review, no resolution. So committee discussion. So today we're gonna be introduced to Brian Champion, who took over for, I can't remember her name. But he's the new person to deal with Prop S, and he'll explain to you in more detail if it has changed from the previous person that we had in that.
You mean that young lady, the girl we had? Okay.
And, in the Google Drive, it has information about Prop S. He's going to give a presentation, you know, where we are today, and present the RFP for us to approve so that they can go ahead and publish the RFP. We are about a week behind, I believe, on getting it out on the street. So with that, Brian, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the whole committee? And as we talk, you'll be introduced to each alderman, you know, in that order without us having to go around. But we'll be called for questions, and then you get to know who's who. So if you don't mind, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and where you came from, and why in the world would you want to work for the city of St. Louis?
Sure. Thanks for having me, everyone. My name is Brian Champion. I just started here with the Department of Public Safety 3 weeks ago, so still trying to get my feet wet and get my head wrapped around everything that this department does. I'll be taking over the Prop S administration for Morgan Williams. A little bit about myself. I moved here with my wife. She's a physician at Barnes Jewish Hospital. We moved from North Carolina, so still trying to get settled into the city and everything. Glad to be here and talk about Prop S today.
Thank you. Welcome. Take it away.
All right, so I'm happy to start with the 2021 RFP proposal, if you would prefer. Sure, it is more or less exactly the same as the previous year's RFP that was finalized and approved and posted. Sorry, I'm also dealing with a small computer and lots of tabs. The only changes that were really made among within it were in the purpose section on the first page. We added a little language in the third paragraph that discusses the average amount of funding that was awarded per awardee last year. There was some discussion in the office that having this language might make it easier for applicants to fill out a budget and apply within a reasonable means, essentially, so that there's less back and forth about what's granted and them then having to update their budget. So we think that that might just be an easy way to help with the administration process. The second change is also on that page too, the proposal, instruction, and requirements. Basically, it's just been reorganized, tried to space it out a little bit more clear, and then describe how each of the attachments that are required are to be ultimately answered.
Hi, sweetie.
Did someone say something? Go ahead, Brian.
Okay. The next change was in attachment number 2 on page 3. Really all that happened there was breaking question 1 into 2 questions. That way we can try and read their answers in a clearer manner. We were getting a lot of responses that tried to answer too many questions in one answer, essentially. So this will hopefully make it a bit easier for applicants to, identify their answers as they need. And then on page 4, attachment 4 is just a budget template for the applicants. Again, that was just expanded a little bit. For example, like the contractor salaries and fringe benefits is one category, taxes are another category, occupancy and facility related expenses are another category. And it's really just to help applicants and then, the board and everyone identify what exactly the groups are intending to spend their grant on. And then the final change we made was in the general terms limitations in page 5. And all that did was add the insurance requirement addendum that was ultimately added to last year's RFP. So we just incorporated that language ahead of time. That's essentially the changes to the 2021 RFP.
Let me ask committee members if they have any questions about, wait a minute. What's the date that you're coming up with again?
Sure. So currently I have Friday, November 13th as the date. As you were saying, we're a few weeks behind where we were last year. So I know that we're all probably hoping to get this out sooner rather than later. November 13th was a Friday, and that was just a date that I thought would be good to get out quickly. If that doesn't work, then, we can amend it as we need to.
Okay, I heard you kind of broke up a little bit. So if you get out on the 13th, what's the return date?
The return date would be December 14th, which is, I believe, 31 full days.
Okay. All right, let's ask if any committee members have any questions. Alderwoman Carol Howard. Okay, Alderwoman Tamika Hubbard, Alderwoman Muhammad, Alderwoman Pam Boyd. Okay, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Are you there, Alderwoman Pam Boyd?
You're feeling pretty good.
Can't hear you.
Okay, I'm multitasking.
Okay.
And so thank you very much, Brian, for coming to the table. I don't have any questions. I'm still listening and trying to get more insight because I know Jeffrey Boyd, Alderman Boyd did a lot last year to better us in regards to how we make choices and stuff and educate us. So I'm just listening.
Okay, Alderman Clark Hubbard.
Thank you, Mr. Champion, for coming on. Just for people who are listening, can you tell them what the process is after November, after it closes? It opens and closes, and then what happens next?
Sure. So as you said, it opens and applicants can apply, and then the program closes, and then the proposals are evaluated, and ultimately certain programs are selected for funding from the Prop S Youth at Risk program. And then we work on, getting all those contracts taken care of as soon as possible.
And when you say chosen, it's chosen by who? Again, just for people who are listening.
Sure. I believe it is chosen by the Board of Aldermen.
Yeah, let me interject real quick.
Yes, please.
And it's in your Google Drive, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, but let me read through. So step 1 is the RFP, it's composed. Step 2 is Public Safety Committee approves and releases, and that's what we're hoping to do today. Step 3 is proposals and reviews received and distributed to Public Safety Committee members and the United Way. The United Way in the past have always helped us do the scoring. Step 4 is a subcommittee is formed. That's the members of the Public Safety Committee and any members who may not be part of the Public Safety Committee. Step 5 is applications are sent, reviewed, and scored by United Way. Step 6, scores of United Way sent back to the Public Safety Committee and the Public Safety Director. Step 7 is Public Safety Director makes recommendations. Step 8, the subcommittee makes recommendations. Step 9 is Public Safety Committee determines funding. So the Public Safety Committee makes the final decision. And sometimes people that didn't make it end up making it, and some people that made it end up not making it, because it's the purview of the Public Safety Committee to make the final recommendations. Step 10 is awardees are informed. Step 11 is the Public Safety Department oversees programming. So that's the process.
Great, thank you. I knew I could read it, but I just wanted for people that are viewing and listening to be able to get that information as well. And thank you again. It was nice meeting you, Mr. Champion. I look forward to working with you.
That was a great move, woman. I like that. Keep the public informed. Okay, Mr. Chairman, do you have any questions? Okay, I don't see him in the chair, so let's go to. I'll come back to you, Alderwoman Howard.
I don't have any questions. I'm going to trust that you'll handle this like you did last year. So I'm a bystander on this.
All right, Alderwoman Howard.
I stepped away, and what are the dates this year? I guess we have before us the dates from last year. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if Mr. Champion, good to meet you, Brian. I stepped away, and I don't know if he gave the dates. I just was wondering. I know we're behind schedule here, as far as what we did last year. So I'm just wondering, what are the dates? When will it be out? And then when will they have to return it? Or have you determined that yet?
Sure. Nice to meet you as well. Currently, we have it listed at being issued opening Friday, November 13th, with responses due no later than 4 p.m. Monday, December 14th. That's trying to get this pushed out as quickly as we can after getting everything approved ahead of time. We really want to make sure we get this rolling. It can be changed if needed, I suppose.
I have no issue with the dates. I just thought it would be good to know since we're looking at the RFP from last year. So, okay. And I understand when you put it together, you'll decide those dates. So thank you.
No problem.
And I want to apologize to the committee. what Brian did send us the 2021 with the updated dates.
Oh.
And the changes that were recommended. I just emailed it to the clerk to be emailed to each member and put on the Google Drive.
Oh, okay.
But it's pretty much the same thing. You wasn't here.
Yeah.
So let's just go over real quick. So one more time, Brian, go over what the changes are, the minor changes, if you don't mind.
Sure. So, as Alderman Boyd said, they're pretty minor changes, mostly just for clarification of language or administration purposes. So I have the 2020.
Uh-oh. Somehow Brian fell off. Well, let me read it to you while he's hopefully trying to get reconnected. So some of the changes, the language added to the budget description to clarify past year's average award. He's suggesting hopefully this will encourage applicants to set budgets more within the likelihood of approval, so we do not have to go back and forth and asking for them to update their budget. Proposal instructions, the language discussing the required attachments has been clarified. There's an attachment 2, which is the proposed program questions have been expanded out a bit to try to steer applicant answers toward more direct answering of each question. Attachment 4, additional categories have been added to the budget in an attempt to make the applicant budget slightly more accurate and reviewable, which has always been one of the challenges that we had. You know, sometimes it was kind of hard to really understand that budget matching up with, you know, the programmatic piece of their application. And there was a lot of going back and forth. Terms, general terms, limitations, miscellany, added the insurance requirements that were added as an addendum to last year's RFP. So there was an insurance requirement added last year, and they want to make sure they clarify that. Did I pretty much cover that well, Brian? I tried to fill in while you were gone.
Yeah. It sounds like you got everything. Sorry about that. I must have just lost connection.
Yeah, no problem. And I would just say that we've come a long way with the process. It's become a more streamlined, more professional. Brian, I believe now they do it online. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. So that's going to be one of our next steps, is making sure that we've got the online portion all set up. It's a fillable application that'll make it a lot easier for the applicants, so, and for us.
And it creates a matrix at the end of the day, so that you know what neighborhoods funding is being requested, you know, how many people be served per neighborhood, if it's citywide. It's really a neat process. We've come a long way. Last year was the first year that we kicked off the online portion. And from what I understand, it worked well. Now, Brian, you're new. What has been the feedback you've gotten from us going online from last year?
Sure. I, in my 3 weeks here, haven't actually received much feedback myself about the process switching online. My gut instinct is that it's been easier. But again, I haven't heard anything directly from any of the current grantees, though I have been asked a few times now when it will open. So,
okay. You want to talk to us about some of the successes that we've had from last year's grants, or if there were any failures? Did we spend all the money? Where are we up to date?
Sure. Happy to talk about that. So the current grantees have so far invoiced for about half of what has been granted out. A lot of that, and based upon all the programmatic reports that I've reviewed and read through, since again, I've only been here a few weeks, they've all discussed that COVID-19 has certainly made a huge impact in their ability to support communities. Mutual programming, but everyone's seemingly making it work so far. We have a few that haven't invoiced yet, but that's not necessarily meaning that they won't. They might just have programs that are starting up in the fall, and we just haven't received the first invoice yet. So.
Okay. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. We had 16 grantees. Is that pretty much still, no one fell off?
No one fell off. And actually we're still in the process of getting the 22nd Judicial Court ranking technical contract completed. So that was a late addition is my understanding. And we're trying to get that taken care of. Apparently there was a lot of back and forth.
So ranking technical was added as well as 22nd Judicial? No,
that's one program, yeah.
Okay. So how were they added? Did we have leftover monies?
I don't know if added is the right word. I think just the initial contract process has taken a little longer than the other.
Okay.
I've been trying to figure it out myself in terms of, you know, what happened before I was here. So I'm trying to, you know, dig through all the old files and everything as well. But we are getting that contract completed.
Well, let me see if any committee members have any questions about last year awardees.
Sure.
And let me just read them. I just think it's worth, you know, giving a summary of who got awarded last year. So last year, the awardees were the 22nd Judicial Court, Beware Young Men, Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Eastern Missouri, CARE STL, Gene Slays Boys and Girls Club, Harambe Youth Training Corporation, Herbert Hoover Boys and Girls Club, LifeWise, formerly Kingdom House, Matthew Dickey's Boys and Girls Club, Pianos of People, Roosevelt Community Council, St. Louis Boxing and Mentoring, St. Louis Story Stitchers, St. Louis Youth Jobs, Thomas Dunn Learning Center, Throwing and Growing Foundations. Those were all the ones that were recommended by the Public Safety Subcommittee and the committee as a whole last year. So let me go around and ask if there are any members that have any questions about any of the awardees from last year. Alderwoman Howard.
I have no questions, thank you.
Okay. Alderwoman Pam Boyd.
Mr. Vice Chair, I thought we had asked that because we felt it was a problem that we never got reports back to see where people are, how they had produced, and then if they had dollars left and what we were doing, because I know last year we were struggling with a lot of them that had a lot of dollars left. And we didn't feel that was fair if they couldn't spend their dollars and get their reports in. So have we got reports back to give us an update on these people that have received those dollars?
Well, that's what I was hoping to get from Brian, but what it sounds like, Brian being here only 3 weeks, it seemed like almost this was dumped on you. Brian, I feel so bad for you in a way.
No, don't.
Call you. I will be calling you after this hearing to talk more about how do we, you know, get the information that the committee really needs to get, because there was concern about some agencies hadn't spent the money and can't spend all the money, but reapplying. And there was also talk about some agencies have gotten money since the inception of the program, and we may, you know, want to fund some different programs just out of fairness. So I'll be having more intimate conversation with you about that on behalf of the committee. And we do need to get an update on what their outcomes look like right now. Even if they have an invoice, they still should be sending in, I think, monthly reports, correct? Programmatic reports?
Right. So the reports come in with the invoice. We cannot invoice without, or we cannot pay out an invoice without a programmatic report.
Okay.
So I can run through some of the programs that I've seen so far through reports. Beware Young Men, for example, has been holding multiple Zoom sessions, and they focus on employment readiness, community involvement, and they serve approximately 10 youth, meeting, if I was reading their most recent report correct, which I believe that I was. Big Brothers Big Sisters of Eastern Missouri has also switched in part to virtual programming. And so some of what they've done is try and connect youth to the necessary technology that they'll need to continue schooling and accessing some of their support programs. So that's a lot of what we're seeing in some of these reports now.
Okay, but that's just one out of 16.
Yeah, well, that was Beware Young Men and Big Brothers and Sisters. I'm happy to run through all the ones that I've seen reports for if you'd like right now.
What, so not to, belabor all of this, can you just give us a report, updated report, a formal written report on where we stand today? Because that's going to make a difference on who gets funding next year, on how, well they did with reporting. And I think we have to be respectful and mindful of the whole pandemic situation. That may have caused some people to be a little behind on their outcomes, but those outcomes are very important as well. How well are they doing?
Of course.
Alderwoman Ingrassia asked.
Sure, I can do that.
You skipped me.
Did I? I'm so sorry. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard.
That's okay.
I got to run in my mouth. My apologies.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I had a couple quick questions, and I know you told him that you don't want to be laborer, but if he can let us know which ones have not reported or started their programming.
Good question.
Yet, I would like to get that information. And I think just what you said, Alderman Boyd, it's very important that organizations that are selected are able to push through and continue to work and adapt to the challenges of pandemics. So I think that's going to be key also in selection process to see how many people, because the needs didn't get smaller, they got greater during the pandemic. So we need to make sure that organizations use these funds and use them wisely to continue to meet the needs and the challenges in the community. But again, if you can just mention the ones that have not at all. Now you said because there were some that hadn't reported and hadn't started at all. If you can mention those organizations, that would be great.
Sure. Would you like that in the report that I send you, or just mention them right now?
Both.
All right. Let's see. So far, I have not received a report from CARE STL. They actually sent an email recently asking if there's any way they could do a contract extension. I also have not seen anything from, let's see, the Roosevelt Community Council and the St. Louis Boxing and Mentoring Program and St. Louis Youth Jobs.
So go ahead, Alderwoman.
I was just going to say, okay, thank you.
So you're saying that you've received 0 invoices for this current year?
From those programs, correct.
Okay. Good information. I look forward to getting everything in writing. It's going to really help make these decisions moving forward. And some of them may be in jeopardy of just losing the funding altogether based on, how they can justify not spending anything. Hopefully they've spent it and they just have a lot of money that they didn't need the reimbursement. There's a cat walking right on across. Okay, that's a nice distraction. Okay, Brian. Now let's go to the cat lady, Alderwoman Ingrassia.
Sorry about that. Always good for some entertainment value, I suppose. Brian, it's nice to meet you. Let me know how I can be helpful with what you're doing. I just wanted to say thank you again to Alderman Boyd. I think I was on the subcommittee last year and really enjoyed the work. And I think we made some real meaningful changes to how we operate. I'm concerned about the fact that there is a grantee from last year that doesn't have a contract signed at all. So looking forward to your report. And then I guess just as the alderman from the 22nd mentioned, like we are in a pandemic. So what does that mean in terms of expenditures? Like, I know, for example, the schools have been out, right? So Roosevelt High School, who has an after-school program, their students haven't been in school since March. And so what, if anything, we might be thinking about doing to communicate with them about the money that they are sitting on, and potential for adaptively, using the money to still provide services, even though they can't be in person. And then I'm curious also what the mechanism is. I don't know if we've ever taken back money. What is the mechanism by which we would be able to do that if a contract is not followed through on?
So I'll start with your last point, and you might have to refresh me on the former.
Sorry,
no problem. But it's my understanding that the funds are earmarked, but no fund is actually paid out until we receive an invoice. So though it is earmarked as Prop S money that will be going towards, and they can be reimbursed up to that amount in the contract.
Okay.
They aren't given all of it up front.
Right. I apologize. I should have worded that differently. Where does that money go if it's not used? Does it go back into the Prop S fund for the next year?
That is something that I can definitely find out for you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah. And then I asked about the, with specificity, the 22nd Judicial Court. I remember that being something that there were at least a couple of aldermen advocating for, but the fact that they haven't signed a contract at all and we're almost a year later seems concerning.
So the contract has now been signed and is it has been dropped off to E&A for approval. So they have signed it. It's just, my understanding is it's taken a little while to get to where we are now. And I'm trying to keep that ball rolling.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I guess the last part of it was just, I mean, have you been in proactive communication with any of the providers who, I mean, I'm assuming Roosevelt's one of them, boxing and mentoring. I mean, there's just some things that can't be done in person. And so what will happen to that money for those organizations?
Sure. I have not been in proactive conversations with some of those groups, but that is definitely on my agenda of things to tackle now, basically.
Okay, great. Nice to meet you virtually. Again, I'm around if I can be supportive. And Alderman, or Mr. Vice Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to ask a couple of questions.
You're more than welcome. Yeah, Brian, I'm really looking forward to hearing what the 22nd Judicial Court has to say. I'm going to assume with the pandemic, maybe they're not seeing as many people, so therefore they didn't need it. And if so, I'm assuming they probably wouldn't be applying again this year since they just signed a contract toward the end of the year. Alderwoman Pam Boyd.
Yes, the question is, I heard Alderwoman Ingrassia was asking Brian, had anyone reached out to these organizations? But I guess my feelings are, even though we are in a pandemic, I feel that we should have had to reach out to them. They should have been reaching out to us. And regards to the pandemic, they should have came to look at an emergency plan, because everybody was hit with it in March. And so my question is, up until March, what did they do? And then two, have they came back with an emergency plan to say, Brian, this is what we're doing because of the pandemic and we're on this page? And so I'm just having a problem with holding organizations' hands and they're not being accountable on their own. So that's my issue.
Yeah, and Brian, that has been a problem in the past. We've coddled a lot of these agencies. We work with them, we work with them, and you shouldn't have to go out and beg agencies to give you the proper documents that you need to process for payment, to give you the right documents to get the contract signed. I mean, that's why last year I think it was so refreshing to have a better program, especially online, because we knew right away if they didn't submit the 1090 or whatever the form is, they didn't submit the insurance, and they just were eliminated. You know, in the past 10, 15, 13 years, it's like we were chasing, the public safety department was chasing people down to give them money. It makes no sense. So we definitely want to turn the corner on that and start trying to fund organizations that's going to be, you know, professional on top of things and make your life easier, because you're only one person and you only have to deal with, from last year, 16, but there have been in the past, we funded 30 organizations where one person had to run out and try to get the paperwork just to get the contract signed, and it's just been a mess. So it's gotten a lot better, even though you're probably getting here being baptized by fire, it seems like, and just trying to find your way through it. It's 10 times better than it used to be. And like Alderwoman Ingrassia said, I mean, she's very resourceful as it relates to grants, and it was good to have her on the subcommittee last year. She's a good resource. I certainly will be here to support you and what you need to do to make this successful, and so that you don't drown, you know.
Thank you very much.
I had a quick question about, as it relates, and it might have been answered and I missed it, but as it relates to the agencies that have not picked up any of their money yet, but let's say they don't, well, they can't by now. So does that money roll over and go into next year? Is it in addition to next year's Prop S fund, so there'll be more for us to award next year, or how does that?
Alderwoman, that is my understanding, the chairman's understanding. I'm not sure if it's always worked that way in the past, because I remember ENA took some leftover money and put it somewhere else, which was very irritating. And the thing about it is we didn't know. We did not know that all this hundreds of thousands of dollars were unspent, and it kept rolling over because they didn't spend it. But we're more mindful now. As of last year, we're paying more attention, and we don't want that money given away, you know, to a different program. We want to make sure that that money is spent for the intended purpose that the taxpayers approved that funding to be spent, what has to do with, you know, crime reduction in our communities, public safety initiatives.
Okay, and then on the resolution, I had just trying to go back over the list you named for last year, Alderman Boyd. It had ranking on it.
No, it did not. That's something that was thrown in that I was going to ask about.
Oh, okay. We were following each other's lead. Okay, I want you to ask it.
Yeah, I caught that too. So,
okay.
Yeah. Alderwoman Howard.
I just want to add a little bit to you. Back in the day, I was on the Public Safety Committee, and the way these were awarded was just very, it was difficult. It was very difficult. And I appreciate the process and how it's been streamlined and probably much more equitable than it was in the past. So I'm more, I dreaded this part of being back on this committee, but I'm okay with it now. It's like there's a little more, because you get some of these and sometimes you don't know anything about the organization and it's hard. So anyway, I appreciate the committee's work on this and Brian's work as he moves forward. I appreciate that this will be a much more well organized and more competitive process as we move forward. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that, you know, if Jeffrey would form his subcommittee, my promise, like last year, is I will not try to interfere. That's try not to. You know, he did a great job last year. Plus, he gets all the phone calls. So he gets to make some people happy and other people like, why didn't I get the money? But Jeffrey did a great job last year. He brought back their recommendations. The whole committee voted on what he recommended. So I would ask again, and I know you're doing it, but that you chair, pick your own committee, and I will stay out of the way because I have no questions.
Okay. Brian, let me ask you one last question for clarity.
Sure.
Is ranking in the 22nd two the same or are they separate?
Those are the same, is my understanding. Yeah, it's the same.
Well, that would make sense then. So Alderwoman from the 26th, you got clarity on that?
All right.
I'm sorry, he said ranking and what was the same, his computer?
Second judicial.
Oh, ranking and, okay, then, okay, all right.
That makes sense, okay. Because I thought there were extra one thrown in there.
Right.
I got a communication from the Public Safety Department about that clarifies this, and it says, City Courts provides rank and training to justice-involved youth. Prop S award was to fund the Rankin programming for those youth. In the past, Prop F's contract was with Rankin. This year, City Council returned the contract with courts and said it must be with Rankin. In other words, we contracted with the courts, but we're paying Rankin. So now it's going to be directly with Rankin instead of going through the courts and the courts paying them, is my understanding. So the courts returned the contract, all signatures in September, and it's just been winding its way through the public safety system. The signature delay was explained as difficulty with COVID. So it's just a change in how I guess the money's being awarded. This is the communication I got from somebody in public safety, Kim Cole, actually. So, and I'm sure you've worked with her, Brian, also.
Yes.
So,
yeah, she would have been able to do a much better job explaining it all than I sorry about that.
Well, it's understandable. You just arrived. So, okay. I appreciate her texting me. So anyway, that's what's going on with that. So
okay.
I didn't know until she told me. So I just thought I'd share. Thank you.
Brian, you report to Kim Cole, correct?
I report to Charlene Deacon.
Okay, Deacon, okay. There was another question. United Way. So I know at one point United Way wanted payment in order to, support us. Last year they did it for free, my understanding. Are they still willing to support scoring the process for free and being a partner in that way?
I am currently in communications with United Way, trying to figure out exactly where they stand on it. I'm leaning towards probably not willing to do it that way this year. But like I said, we're still in the middle of figuring everything out that in regards to United Way. So.
Okay. All right.
I'll be able to give an update very soon, hopefully.
Sounds good. Excuse. Well, we're gonna move back to excuse. We're about to wrap this meeting up. So why don't we move to excuse the Alderwoman from Alderwoman Tamika Hubbard was here. She had to leave early. Move to excuse the Alderman from the 21st Ward. I move to excuse the Alderman from the 21st Ward.
I'll second that.
Moving to second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Now, announcements. Let's roll call on any announcements, and then we're out here. Alderwoman Howard, Carol Howard, any announcements?
No, sir.
Okay, Alderwoman Pam Boyd, any announcements?
No, sir.
Okay, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, any announcements?
No.
Chairman Vaccaro, any announcements?
Other than Greg, my friend Greg, who also monitors the meetings with me, he says that there is no ordinance against barbecuing in the front yard. And he was reading it while we were there. So
okay,
unless another ordinance does it. So we can do that though. Okay. So that was my only announcement.
All right, so thank you. So on the strategy on that, we can ask if the Alderwoman from the 12th would do an amendment on the floor, or we just do another bill to amend her bill,
right?
At a later date. Thank you for that, Greg. I have no announcements. So with that, I move that the Public Safety Committee meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this for me.
You're welcome.